Hey guys, David McElwain here with Shoshone Hunt Stories. This is where we give you the tips, the tactics, also lets you get an inside look of what it is like to go to these outfitters on these hunts before you actually go. All right, guys, so we are here today with Peyton, and we have a new friend on here as well. So Peyton, we just got back from Africa last week, getting back into the workload, and it hadn't been too bad. We've been selling a few hunts and having a pretty good week, aren't you?
Yep, we are right back into the workload. Spring is in full swing, and fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to put it, we are getting ready to shove off for Africa again here in another 2.5 weeks. Another set of clients to go on a fantastic hunting trip with Caribou safaris, and then we're going to zip up to Zimbabwe for a week for a big photo safari up in Wingy Park with the safaris. So there's a lot going on between that and kids baseball and softball and one thing after another. But I feel fortunate because I've gotten so much time to talk to you, and this is the second podcast we've done in like a week. Another one dropped yesterday, I believe, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. We've got Pete Buist with us here. Pete is, I'm going to say, world famous hunting guide from Alaska, infamous versus famous. And we'll let Pete introduce himself. Pete, introduce yourself, Pete.
Hi, I'm Pete.
As simple as that. The best way that I could describe Pete is he would describe me as the fruit of his refrigerator, not the fruit of his loins.
Peyton very often calls me Dad number 2, and then I have to remind people he's not the fruit of my loins, but he's the fruit of my refrigerator. He's been hanging out at my house since he was about 4, which was in the Pleistocene age. He was great buddies with me, great buddies with my homemade son, Jason, and we have a great history.
And a lot of it, the older we get.
Well, I tell you, Pete, I've heard a lot about you. I heard a lot about your stories. And like I said, I'm looking forward to talking to you about them. For the people who don't know, and Pete, I'll let you kind of talk about this as well, but you're an author. You have a book that I've actually been reading the past few days. I really have enjoyed it, but the name of your book is Me Caribou is on Fire. Where did you come up with the title of that book?
Well, let me correct you first. I'm not so much an author as I am a storyteller, and one of the things I learned at some point during the writing of this book is I'm not an English teacher either, but lucky for all of us today, I am a pretty good storyteller. The book is based on diaries and journals that I have kept over the years of my hunting trips and trapline trips, and also my life as a wildland firefighter. I always kept journals and diaries, and I would send them to a handful of people, and most of those people would get right back to me and say, at some point you need to write a book. And I never had time to do it. And then along came COVID. And while we were all sequestered by COVID, I said to myself, this probably would be the time if I'm ever going to do it. And so I took a bunch of those journals and diaries. It took a fair amount of time selecting stories out of there that were actually, most of them particularly humorous. Probably my all-time favorite one was a hunt on the North Slope of Alaska in Game Management Unit 26. And I had a friend from Australia who was hunting with me. One of the things I did as an outfitter in Alaska was I traded hunts with guys all over the world. It was really cool and a heck of an opportunity. Non-resident alien hunters have to be with a guide, so your average do-it-yourself fellow can't trade with somebody in Australia. But I could because I was a licensed outfitter. And so I had a couple of Aussies in camp, and one wanted to shoot, among other things, a caribou with his 45-90, which is a black powder rifle. Shoots a black powder cartridge, but it's still black powder. Dan looked at a bunch of caribou, finally selected one that he thought would do the trick. He was being guided by a firefighter friend of mine, and this guy wisely stayed up on the bank and let Dan make his stalk. At about 100 yards or so, Dan shot the caribou with his 45-90, and it went down and then got back up and staggered around in circles, and finally started plodding away from where it was hit. Ironically, it plodded directly for Dan, or as Dan put it, he charged me. But the caribou walked over to him on the gravel bar, and Dan is now reloaded and holding the 45-90 at his hip, and when the caribou's chest touched the end of the rifle, Dan let off another round, and that projectile went in through the top of the sternum and came out back by his plumbing somewhere, hit a rock. The rock broke apart, came down, pieces of it rained down from above. One cut Dan's head open, whereupon he began to bleed copiously. He was rocked back on his fanny, and he kind of woke up sitting on a gravel bar, blood streaming down his face with a dead caribou at his feet. And the young guide ran up to him and said, "What happened?" And Danny says, "I think I shot myself." And because all he knew was he pulled the trigger and then there was blood in his eyes. So now Glenn's having an apoplexy over this whole thing, because this was back in the time when we didn't have satellite phones and this sort of thing, and he's wondered how long it's going to take to get rescued.
David, some people call that the 90s.
Yeah. Well, Peyton, I was born in the 90s, so
Call that the 90s. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Pete.
Well, so Glenn is wandering around trying to figure out what to do next, and not having a lot of luck. And the next time he looks at Dan is kicking the caribou's neck. And so he hollers at him. He says, "What now?" And Dan uttered those immortal words that are now the title of the book. He said, "I think me caribou's on fire." And what had happened was there was enough unburned black powder, well, still burning as it came out the muzzle of the rifle, and it had ignited those long white hairs on the caribou's neck, and the caribou was smoldering on the gravel bar. Yeah, it took probably 15, 20 minutes before, we had to fire. I'd say I wasn't there. I have to believe the Aussie and the traumatized guide. They got the fire out and determined that Dan had not shot himself. And he had a really nice caribou that scored almost 400 points, and everybody was happy.
Now that's how you start a podcast.
That's how you start a podcast, and we got a lot of stuff to get to with Pete that are like that. And David, just backing up a little bit on my history with Pete and how close we've been over the years, and why I really wanted you to meet him, chat with him. I grew up in Pete's house, basically, aside from mine. I shot my first bear with Pete when I was 8th grade. So I was a little bit older than that. I was just going into the 8th grade when I shot my first bear with Pete, which happened to be a cinnamon bear that squared 7'2". And right before I shot the thing, Pete leaned down and whispered in my ear, "He's not that big, but he'll do for tonight." Which of course he was lying. So I shot my first bear with Pete. Fast forward another 20 something years later, and we're sitting in another blind with my oldest boy, little Peyton, who's not so little anymore. And Peyton shot his first bear with Uncle Pete sitting there, and of course proceeded to tell Pete, "If you're still alive when I have kids, maybe you can take them hunting too." So the history, and that's on YouTube, by the way. So the history runs pretty deep. We went to Africa together for the first time 20 years ago, which we're going to get into and talk about all that stuff. Really quick, I want to segue real quick. I want to get some housekeeping stuff taken care of. I want to get back to Pete because this is going to be his show. David, jump in here whenever you want. David is working extremely hard, editing his little heart out. We've got 2 episodes that David and I filmed together. Well, he filmed, but I just happened to be there. Down on the Eastern Cape, of South Africa. Those videos are going to be coming out here in the next couple of months. We've got the other Africa hunt coming up, and we're going to be filming a couple episodes, for YouTube for that. And David, we got a plethora of hunts coming up that are going to be filmed, right? I mean,
we have a lot. There's a lot coming down the pipe. So, I don't know if you want to go through them right now, but we I just got back from filming a turkey hunt that will be out. We actually did phenomenal. Like, it was kind of crazy how good it worked out, and that was salmon fishing. And so then we'll roll into our Shoshone group hunt. We're having one out in Colorado with all the guys, and going to be chasing some pronghorn from there.
My first pronghorn hunt. That'll be fun.
Yeah, my first pronghorn hunt as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing what it's like out there. From there we'll go to the mountain to chase elk. So we've got a couple of different places.
A couple different elk hunts. We've got Sam and his family are going to be hunting elk, CWMU property in Utah for some monster elk. We got Patrick, one of our consultants, for filming him on an elk hunt up with Mark Parsons with Inkmar Outfitting up in Alberta. We've got Terry Greenwood, our quadriplegic friend who reached out last year to help us book an elk hunt. He is hunting moose and caribou in Newfoundland, believe it or not. And we are filming that. Lots going on. So check out YouTube. Lots of stuff coming up there. David's a wizard on the editing. About everything on that YouTube channel is better than half the crap I see on TV.
I appreciate the kind words.
We're right in the middle of our membership drive. If you haven't got your annual membership, they're $100. You get $250 off your next hunt. You get a Sitka coupon that you can use online. You get a really nice high quality digital camo Shoshone hat along with that membership. But like I said, you get $250 off your next hunt. And you're entered to win one of 3 hunts, all expenses trip, besides airfare to hunt with Magnus Crossbird with Ranchero Safaris in South Africa for sable and some other plains game, right, David? And then we've got a filmed hunt with Vern McNeese hunting whitetail up in Alberta, which I did that hunt last November, and it was like whitetail hunting in Disneyland. And then we got a filmed turkey hunt with Native Thunder Outfitters in Kansas next year for turkey, and they won 100% this year. All of our clients did. So, man, there's just a lot going on, a lot of good stuff. Check out the website, check out the YouTube channel. But Dave, you got anything to add to that or anything else?
No, just
not about so much.
Three hunts given away, and it's pretty phenomenal. The quality the hunts should be given away too. And Peyton, you called the guy I know we talked about it before, but you called the guy who won last year, and he said that he would never probably have been able to go to Africa. And it was kind of a lifetime for him.
Yeah, it was cool. Sam and I called that fella up and asked him. I think he just figured we were just trying to sell him something, and said, "Hey, this is Peyton and Sam from Shoshone." And he said, "Well, hey, how's it going?" I was like, "You want to go to Africa?" And he was, just kind of that telemarketer kind of thing. He's like, "Well, I'll never be able to afford it. I can't do that." I'm like, "Well, free." It was a really cool phone call. It was a lot of fun, and I've helped him put that trip together and got him squared away at the. He'll be staying at Afton Guest House on the way up to hunt with Magnus, and just got him squared away on a great trip. But lots of stuff coming up. David, anything else with that?
Nothing I can think of. I think, like I said, just keep a watch on our YouTube channel. We'll release it on our. We'll also release it on our email subscriber list, notifying everybody when it comes out, and obviously social media and everything. But
absolutely,
it should be good. We should have some pretty good things coming down the pipe. I'm excited for, and get to do some more hunting. So it should be a pretty good fall,
which is always fun. But I'm excited to hear more from Pete, because David, I know you're going to enjoy some of these stories. I've been hearing them for my whole life, and fortunately, I've been able to be involved in some of them. Absolutely, but Pete, how did you get to Alaska? Well, I'm segueing into this because it's actually an interesting story about how you came to be in Alaska, the history of your guiding career, because that really sets the stage for what happened next, kind of later in life when you got into going to Africa with me and with Dan, David, the Caribou guy. We're not done with Dan yet. Dan is involved in some of these other adventures. And I will say, David, that caribou hunt that Pete was talking about, when Dan and those Aussies came back to Fairbanks from that trip, I shot my first antlered moose with Pete and Dan right when they got back from that trip. And I still have the pictures. I still have the rack from that moose hanging on the wall. And those Aussies, when they filmed their hunt on like an Australian beta video camera, so it's like even a different kind of camera than they use over here, that camera back got stolen off Pete's porch after their hunt, and I don't think they ever got it back. Did they, Pete?
They did not. And they were more upset about that than their passports being stolen.
Yeah, just crazy. Just unbelievable. But Pete, can you give a little background on how you came to Alaska, your guiding career, where you got started? And I'll just kind of let you take it and kind of steer you to a couple funny stories. I want to make sure you tell, but I'll just let you take it.
Sure thing. Well, I don't like to admit this, but I'm originally from New Jersey, which is a small, flat place in the lower 48. I don't want anybody to think that I am not a red-blooded American male, and in fact, probably at least an honorary redneck. But under the mattress on my bed, instead of Playboy, there were copies of Outdoor Life and Sports Afield. So I dreamed about Alaska. I knew, before I went to high school that Jack O'Connor hunted with a 270 and useful stuff like that. I'd always wanted to come up north and hunt, and I wasn't quite ready for the opportunity when it presented itself, but it worked out well. On the day I graduated from college after having a deferment from the draft, on the day I graduated and made a little speech at graduation, I drove back home, and in the mail was a notice from my local draft board, and apparently there was no way that the world would be safe for democracy unless I came into the Army. And so I was drafted. I went through basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then went on to South Carolina for further training as an infantry soldier. And basically that training consists of digging holes and getting in them and then filling them back up and learning how to duck when you hear somebody shooting at you, because this was during the time of the Vietnam War. But since every once in a while I'm able to walk in between raindrops when it's raining, just after the graduation ceremony at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, the first sergeant had us all lined up at attention, and he says, "Is there anybody in this formation that can type?" And three of us raised our hands and admitted to the fact that we could type. Well, as it turned out, that was a good thing to admit, because the three of us got sent to Fort Wainwright, Alaska, and the rest of that graduating class got shipped off to Vietnam to get shot at. And so I was on my way to Alaska. I said, I got out my prayer rug, said a little prayer to my 10th grade typing teacher, and I typed with a vengeance. And I did my time in the Army here, then got out, couldn't see any reason to go back to New Jersey. Ironically, in the course of, while I was still in the service, I ended up being licensed as an assistant guide. Myself and three other Army buddies were on a do-it-yourself brown bear hunt, which is something that Alaska residents can do, down in Game Management 9, down at the very end of the Alaska Peninsula. And we bumped into a fellow by the name of Red Beeman. He was guiding for another outfitter. They were in a camp in the next bay. They had 7 hunters in camp. They ended up with 1 brown bear for 7 hunters, and 3 rat-ass GIs who really didn't know what they were doing, but had some pluck and persevere. We had 3 brown bears for 4 guys. So Red said to us, "Hey, if any of you guys ever want to think about working as an assistant guide, you'd have to start out as a packer, but I'd hire any one of you." And we all claimed that we did. But I went that first fall. I took 30 days of leave from the Army and worked for Red. And boy, I learned a ton of stuff about guiding from him, and he's somewhere north of 90, and we still talk regularly, and I'm grateful for what he taught me.
And you learned how to make a fire in a tent one day.
Well, it's funny now.
I was saying it probably wasn't funny then when all this happened.
One of the things that almost cured me of wanting to be a guide is we had some hunters, ironically, from New Jersey. And we'd had some really bad weather that September. In Red's camp there, I mean, we had a great camp. There were plywood tent platforms with 4 or 5 rounds of logs up and a wall tent on a frame on top of that. They had bunks in them. They had furniture. They had a plywood door. They had windows framed in. It was pretty spiffy. But one morning, the boys from New Jersey called out and said they needed more firewood for their little wood stove in the tent. So I got some firewood and went over to the tent and knocked on the plywood door, went in and noticed that both the draft and the damper of the wood stove were completely open. So, of course, they could stuff all the wood in that they wanted. The heat was going up the chimney, and it wasn't very efficient that way. So I instructed the brothers on how to use the damper and the draft on the stove. And I stood up and turned around to leave, and the older brother was holding a large handgun pointed underneath my chin, and he explained to me that he had not asked for a lesson on how to use the stove. All he had asked for was wood, and that the next time they needed more wood, maybe just shoot through the top of my tent. So, as I would normally do, if somebody pointed a firearm at me, I took him at his word and went and got him all the wood he wanted. And I went and talked to Red about it, and Red didn't think it was the slightest bit funny. And he had, while we were all over at breakfast, he had one of the other guys go over and steal all our firearms, wrap them up in canvas, and put them out in the woods someplace. And the guys had a fit, and then they wanted to leave, and they did. We put them on one airplane and their gear and their guns on another. And luckily, the next client that we had come in was just a peach of a client. Is a bow hunter. He took a grizzly. Everybody was happy, and I was happy again, and I didn't have to worry about guys from New Jersey anymore.
Do you think that they were just, having a bad hunt, or what do you think the cause of that was? They just, ornery people, you think, or what?
I think they were just used to operating that way. Italian contractors from New Jersey, and they were used to getting their way, and they weren't properly appreciative of what I had to offer.
Well, I'll say, tell you what, that's that'll make you change a career. It seems like, but I'm glad the next hunter worked out pretty well.
That's true, and the advice that you think you want to give them is keep up, shut up, and shoot straight. But that's not the diplomatic way to do it. You got to ease into that.
Yeah, may not be well received by every one of your clients, but sound advice nonetheless.
It is indeed sound advice. If every client followed that advice, they would have a lot more successful hunts, in my somewhat subjective opinion.
Yeah, what were you saying?
I was going to say, one of the ways that I don't want to say old-time guides, Pete, but retired guides tend to discuss their longevity in the guiding business isn't necessarily by how many miles they've walked. And Pete, your master guide number 79, 72?
When I retired, I held Alaska Master Guide number 79. That was my place.
You should be proud, but I remembered that. 79. And it isn't the amount of miles they've walked, it's the amount of meat that they have carried.
Yeah.
And Pete, tell me again, you were able to kind of calculate as best you could the poundage of moose meat that you've carried over the years.
Well, as I explained earlier, I keep rather detailed journals and diaries. And in 1985, I believe it was, I was having my first hernia operation. And when I was recovering from that, I went back through my journals just as sort of something to do while I was laid up. And at a rough estimate of like 700 or 750 pounds of meat from each moose, I figured how many moose I had packed and multiplied it by that average amount of meat on one of those moose, and came up with a figure somewhere just north of 47,000 pounds of moose meat, which made the hernia very explainable.
Yeah.
I'll say. Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever I was able to shoot one next to the truck, like I did last fall, Pete was always very appreciative.
I bet so.
Yeah, and a side story to that is when number one son Jason called me one night years ago and said he was still at both he and Peyton were at the university, or Peyton might have been gone by then, but Jason says, Dad, I killed a moose. I said, man, that's great, son. He says, I need a few things. And he started listing what he needed. It was at like 7:00 at night on a Sunday night. He said, I need a Coleman light. I need an axe. I need a meat saw. I need some meat bags. Basically, he needed everything. And so I told him to come get it. And he came, got it. And he said, would you like to go with me? I said, well, where is it? He said, well, it's about 2.5 miles behind a locked gate up Chena Hot Springs Road. I said, now, why don't you take this one and let me know when you're done and bring the stuff back. And so the next morning he called me from the firehouse, and he and the two firefighters he had tricked into going with him had walked in there, gotten that moose cut up and packed out. And he said, Dad, on the way out one of those times, he said, I got to thinking. He says, when you and I hunted moose, this was the first time he had killed a moose without having me with him. So it was all on him. He said, I got to thinking that when you and I hunted moose, we never seemed to kill one in a place where you couldn't drive to it with a four-wheeler, a quad,
yep.
Or pull a boat up by it, or lead a horse to it, or land an airplane by it. He says, that wasn't a mistake, was it? Not a coincidence. I said, now you're learning.
Yep. Now he learned that pretty quick. Yeah. That just shows that you're forward thinking. You're not going to shoot one super far out there when you can probably kill one a little closer to the road. No, it's smart.
The older you get, the easier it is to stay off the trigger when you're seeing one in a bad place.
Yeah. No.
But on the contrary, a guided client can expect to when you spot a big moose, a guided client can expect the guide to take them over there and let them shoot it. And, I mean, that's what you paid the big bucks for, is that for that guide and assistant guide and packer to get that thing out of there. And that's not unreasonable to think of that.
Yeah. No. Hopefully most times that happens. Definitely it should for sure. But Pete, talk about your trapping career. That's something I'm pretty interested in too, but your trapping career in Alaska. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I trapped quite a bit in New Jersey, starting when I was about 7 or 8 years old. Trapped the standard stuff back east, muskrats and raccoons, and I remember catching my first fox and being pretty excited about that. And during the time I was in forestry school at Syracuse, I trapped some interesting wilderness, including the median strip of the New York State Thruway between Syracuse and Utica. And so by the time I got to Alaska in the Army, I was pretty well convinced that I was a regular mountain man and there wasn't much I didn't know about trapping. And then winter came, and as it turned out, Alaska is a little different than trapping in New Jersey, starting with snow up to your ass and minus 30, minus 40 degree temperatures. So I had a lot to learn, and the way I learned it was not with YouTube. I talked to some older trappers in town and befriended them and offered to help them on their lines, and so was able to learn a lot from a bunch of old guys, both white guys and natives, and ended up with a incredibly intense trapping in Alaska training program, as it were. And, in 1973 or 74, I helped start the Alaska Trappers Association. I served as its president for many years, and I still do a bit of trapping here. Although now I go outside, as we call the rest of the world, in the wintertime, and I trap coyotes and coons and mink and muskrat in New Jersey. So I'm still, in fact, when I started trapping in New Jersey again, first of all, you can't use traps, you have to use snares. So then I had to learn how to snare without having ass-deep snow again, and it was a whole new learning experience. Trapping has been one of my favorite things to do, for sure.
Pete, I didn't mean to cut you off, David. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Ben.
One of my favorite stories from the book was one I had never heard before, which I was either in a lot of them, or of course I'd heard you talk about a lot of them. But one of my favorite stories from the book I had never heard of before was it, and you got to tell it real quick. Y'all were out on the trap line or cutting trail. It was a story where y'all broke down. It was ended up being a survival story, really. And how far you guys had to walk to get back when the track broke down. And I can't remember who was with you, but could you hit on that one?
It was the late Ron Long from here in Fairbanks, a famous trapper, fur buyer, who also worked at Alaska Fire Service. I knew him in several different ways, and he and I were pioneering some new marten line for him out on the Tanana Flats. We broke a drive axle on the snowmobile, as they say down in the States. While we carried a lot of parts, we didn't have an axle. We had to leave the machine, and we walked by the map 26 miles back to a tent camp that we get put in the day before, where we also had a dog team tied up. We didn't want them to eat each other if we didn't get back to camp. So, yeah, we walked 26 miles in at a minus 25 degree temperature, and it reinforced something that I already knew and should have paid attention to, and that is you don't go two guys on one snow machine. You take two snow machines, so if one breaks down, you got a way to get back to camp.
Yeah. And Pete, that's the same Ron that got murdered, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so David, total side note, when you read that chapter in the book, that you probably already have, fast forward to 2000 and whatever year that was, Pete. So so fast forward to like 2002, I'm on patrol one night, and I was the first on scene with a couple other officers to a homicide scene where Ron and another fella had been shot and killed by another guy that we ended up catching at their house.
Another out, ironically.
So I was the first on scene for that, and these two poor fellas were laying there dead, and I just remember how pissed I was because they had killed the dog, and they had killed their big bulldog was laying there. I remember being so pissed about that, but it's just small town stuff and how things work out. But I was first on scene at that homicide where he got killed years later. How about that, David?
That's pretty tough. It's
It's a small
world.
Especially in Fairbanks.
Yeah.
I'll
but it's like, unless you growing up in that Arctic environment in the winter and in the snow, it's like I can just imagine having to walk that far back. And they just did stuff different than we did, David. Pete used to guide, and I'll have him hit on this in a second, in the Johnson River area, Johnson Glacier area in interior Alaska, which is very accessible by plane. But Pete, they used to hike in all their gear for the season and hike out. And I just remember flying over that country when Christy and I went and hunted in there one time. And the whole time I'm flying in there, I was just envisioning Pete with a backpack on with a bunch of canned goods hiking stuff into that camp. And it just blows me away. It's just like, I just can't even imagine doing it.
Yeah, how times have changed, huh?
Pete is now just a tall, fat, retired guide. But back in the day, I was still tall, but I wasn't fat, and I could do stuff like that.
I know that's hard on the old body. I can't imagine how much meat you carried, how heavy of packs you carried over the years and everything. But speaking of long walks, you guys have hunted muskox in the same area, correct? Or was it the same area?
Yeah,
I've hunted muskox in two places. The first time was on the north slope of Alaska, and I screwed up. I had a bull permit and accidentally shot a cow, and ended up making a long walk when once again the single snow machine broke down, and I walked. Well, in that case, it was probably less than 15 miles, but at 30 degrees below zero with a 30-knot wind, that can be a long 15 miles.
Long night.
From the mouth of the Chaco River into Kaktovik, Alaska. The smart thing to do would have been to put up the tent and stay there, but I wasn't due back for another 3 or 4 days. Now, I said, well, I can see that strobe light at the end of the strip at Kaktovik. I'll just mosey over there. Well, that's the kind of thing that can get you killed, but I lucked out. I made it to Kaktovik.
Yeah.
Now, the other time that I hunted muskox, and it took me several years to get over blaming the muskox for that walk, and I decided, well, I'd really like to take a nice muskox because that one the state took back because it wasn't a bull. So I decided, well, I'll talk to the guy that I know who knows more about muskox than any other person in the state of Alaska. And that person was Ed Shaving Sr., who was a Yupik Eskimo from Nunivak Island. And he and I were on a guide board for a while together. And he said, yeah, just put in for one of those permits. I'll take you. And I had a really, really great hunt, killed a Boone and Crockett bull, and Ed was proud of me for not screwing that up.
And yeah, David, years later, so my buddy Dustin and I drew the same tag that Pete did out there on Nunivak and hunted with James Whitman, who longtime guide on the island. And Pete, by that time, was he above ground or below ground, or is he still?
I think Ed had passed away by then, but
he was below ground.
James had worked
for him,
had apprenticed under Ed for years and years, along with Ed's son, JR.
Yeah.
So,
point of fact is, I shot my muskox. I shot it with a bow. I shot my muskox wearing Pete's jacket that he let me borrow to take on that trip.
I saw I saw the pictures in the book or heard the stories, and that it's cool to be able to go to a place like that and you guys have similar experiences. Like you guys got to hunt in the same general region and all this kind of stuff, and come home. And I know that was cool for you, Peyton.
No, it was.
It's a small world in Alaska. It's even smaller in the village of McCoy.
And it really is. And that was a really cool experience. And we hunted. It was just cool. It was just a cool experience out there with the Yupik Eskimos, and the seal oil. It tasted like fermented dog vomit, but I tried it. The shopping and everything was fun out there, buying some of the good. It was just a really, really cool trip. And Pete, I've been fortunate enough to explore a lot of stuff together. And of course, growing up, and it's hard to find a better mentor than him. And I still remember sitting in the squad room at the Fairbanks Police Department in about 2001. It wasn't Google back then. It was probably like Netscape or AOL dial-up, whatever we were doing at the time, and called Pete on a phone, not a cell phone, because no one had them then, and said, hey, we need to go to Africa together. Let's go do it. And Pete had always been before, and we did it just like so many people that call us, David. It was almost the same thing. We had no idea other than reading capstick books and Hemingway and everything else, but it was literally an internet search at the time led us to, and I don't remember why, but led us to cruiser safaris 20 years ago in May 2003. So 21 years ago now. Pete and I went to Africa together for the first time, and that was the first of several trips over there together for both of us. I still remember it was like it was yesterday, just about everything about it, including getting off the plane. And I brought my bow that first trip, and Pete had brought his muzzleloader and a 300 mag. We had them in the same aluminum Cabela's rifle case. And then when we went to the South Africa police office, and Pete opened up that case, his cherished muzzleloader was broken in half at the grip. In half. Completely split in half. And it was an ominous start to our first safari.
It was Dave. It was just a stock that was broken, but it was rendered inoperable, of course. And the first thing we learned while still in the airport in Johannesburg was how to say shit in about 6 different African dialects, because that's what every cop that looked at that was sore amazed at how South African Airways could have somehow. They had to have dropped the case, because the case was still in one piece. The 300 Win Mag was still in one piece, but the stock, a composite stock, was completely sheared in half. What a great way to start a safari. But we got out to camp, and I glued that stock back together, taped it up with a whole bunch of electrical tape, and then gingerly started working up some light loads to see if it was going to fall apart when I fired it. And I ended up making the entire hunt, killed everything that was on my list and more, because that's just what you African trips work.
As David just found out.
Yeah. They're a real good salesman over there.
Yeah, indeed. And I took everything on that hunt with that repaired muzzleloader, but it looked like crap. So at the end of the hunt, I gave it to the PH. He had been making moose eyes at it, and I didn't really want the thing because it was falling apart. So I gave it to him before I left Africa. Then there's complicated paperwork process to go along with that, but we got through the process. His family was friends with the police chief in a nearby town, and we got all the paperwork taken care of, and I came back and I filed a claim and eventually ended up with a brand new inline muzzleloader, courtesy of South African Airways. Bless their heart.
Yeah, but we've shared so many good times over there together. Pete, can you kind of share a little bit about your thoughts and about Peter and his operation, and kind of some of the fun memories that you have there, and kind of what you like about it? I mean, we obviously book hunts for cruisers, so that's like a shameless plug for them, obviously, but they're going to be featured on some of our upcoming videos. We're on our way back over there with some clients. Can you kind of give a quick little deep dive into what people can expect from there, and kind of some of your favorite, at least one favorite story? And it can even involve Dan the Aussie with the Caribou on fire, David. You even dragged Dan over there on one of those trips.
I do not book hunts for cruisers, so anything I say can be taken at face value. I've been with Peter several times now, and I look at Peter and Lozelle and the kids as basically as family now, and that's how I'm treated when I'm there, and I appreciate that. The fact that I've been in the outfitting business for many years in Alaska makes me a pretty good judge of and fairly objective as to what makes a good outfitter or a good PH. And I have absolutely no problems with anything that goes on at cruiser. Hunting out of a slimy little pup tent in Alaska eating freeze-dried food and climbing 2,000 or 3,000 feet a day to chase sheep is not what to expect in Africa. You are basically weighted on hand and foot. Your laundry is done every day. The food will make you fatter than you already are, and you will see hundreds and hundreds of head of game. It's not like hunting in Alaska. And it didn't take me long to come to appreciate what they had there. Peyton and I had a grand first trip, and that's why I kept going back. Now, the politically correct answer to my favorite, maybe my favorite story at Cruiser is I should say that it was our trip last June, which of course is winter in South Africa, when I went back to Cruiser, as did Peyton, and my son Jason went for the first time. He had been to Africa before, but not with Cruiser. And in fact, Jason and his wife Susan spent their anniversary there. You know, in a normal hunting camp, you say it's my anniversary, and everybody'd toast you with a beer or a drink, and that'd be the end of it. Peter sets up a place out on the veld someplace in the middle of a bunch of sable and other antelope, builds a fire and gives him some steaks to grill and a whole bunch of sides and a bottle of wine and a package of flowers, and says, "We'll come back after sunset." And that's
yeah.
that's the difference between Africa and hunting out of a little pup tent in Alaska, where maybe if it's your birthday, they'll drop a piece of chocolate cake out of a super cub and you can scrape it off the rocks and eat it. So, I mean, it's a whole different deal. But my favorite Cruiser story actually has the same Dan Fields from Narooma, New South Wales in it. And I had 3 Aussies hunting with me at Cruiser in 2005. One of them was a fellow by the name of G. Ross Ferguson, who's a retired electrician from Wangaratta, Victoria. Ross had been on 2 or 3 safaris and for some reason had never shot a zebra. And he wanted one really badly. And he told Peter that he really wanted one badly. Well, he hadn't found one yet, but Dan and I were hunting out of the same baki one day, and Dan had shot a zebra. And we knew from radio traffic where Ross and his PH were sitting in the shade of a tree waiting for some sort of African creature to walk by. And so we went many kilometers out of our way to drive by with Dan's zebra in the back of the baki with all 4 feet sticking up in the air, so it's obvious what it was. And we didn't even, barely slowed down, and Dan hollers out to Ross, "Hey, Ross, we'll be back after lunch. We just got to put this zebra in the fridge."
In the fridge, yeah. Dan. And
It's a different world over there.
Lots of good times over there. And Pete, real quick, David and I just got back from hunting with Kevin down in the Eastern Cape. And you've hunted with Kevin a couple times now too. And can you kind of hit on what you think are some of the differences between the two? And maybe a good experience from hunting with Kevin, because just like at Cruiser, I was there with you with Kevin, at least one of the times. You've been a couple times. But Jason was there. The girls were with us. I mean, it was a real family experience. But can you kind of tell kind of the difference between the two and some of those different nuances and just kind of what your thoughts are there?
Yeah, sometimes I think that people may have only hunted Africa a time or two. Normally have hunted up in the northern part of the country, probably in the Limpopo province, what used to be Northern Province. They're generally, some of them are real big properties, but they're generally behind high fence. And that's not to say that it's not fair chase. because some of them are extensive properties, but it's a whole different deal. Down in the Eastern Cape, the first difference you notice, I guess, is you overnight in Johannesburg, and then you've got to do some more in-country travel, which can be a challenge at times, but it's not the end of the world. But down in the Eastern Cape, first of all, it's not flat. There's a lot of hilly country, in fact, some mountains. But the main thing is it's all free range. Every once in a while, you'll find a place that's fenced that may have something fairly exotic on it that is on your list. But most of it's free range. And the way Kevin operates there is he's part of a hunting conservancy. So there are different places to go for different species. You may hunt actually on Waterfall Farm. You may hunt reed buck, black wildebeest, or something like that, or you may go someplace else onto somebody else's ranch for some of the other things on your list, and it really works well. It's not as fancy as some of the places up north, but it's more homey, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Just like I look at Peter and Lizelle at Cruiser's family, kind of the same way I look at Kevin and Natalie at the same time. I mean, I know the names of all their dogs and stupid stuff like that. You get friendly with the staff. In fact, when Peyton and I and Jason were all there in 2016, it was what I refer to as my hunting moon. I took my new wife, Emily, and we were actually in Africa for 6 weeks. We started out down at the coast hunting bush pig on an Arnold Palmer golf course where they were tearing up the greens. So it wasn't exactly the wilderness, but from there we went up to Kevin's place, and I had bought Emily a package hunt, and she did real well, although she didn't get a kudu. She got everything else and had a grand time and got hooked on Africa, which is not hard to do when you hunt with Kevin.
That's not. David will attest to this. We couldn't get away from the kudu on this trip. Our clients that we're with, they tagged out all their. We thought we were going to get video of kudu hunting when we got back from the coast hunting bush pig. They had all tagged out. Yeah, I mean, we got Dave. I've killing one. But I mean,
it was funny, I twisted my arm for me to kill one because we didn't get yelled on film. I was like, well, I guess I'll shoot one.
Yes, I'll shoot one. I mean, it was, and Kevin was not, I mean, he was surprised happily. I mean, he figured they would all get one during the course of a 10-day hunt, but not in the first 3 days. And we saw some other kudu that, I mean, good.
Yeah.
We were just
there were good ones out there. It felt like there was a very healthy population, which, it was very good. But yeah, Kevin and them, I'll speak on it again, but my first time going to Africa, that place was phenomenal. I really enjoyed the process and like you said, Pete, the hunting concession. So, if he didn't have the species that somebody was looking for, yeah, he knew somebody that had it or that had it on their property. So
exactly,
it worked out really nice.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the conservancy approach, where they pool their land base, and there's always somebody that's got what you're looking for. Do I have time for more? One quick Waterfall Farm?
Oh, yeah. That one. Then I've got one in my hip pocket to throw at you here in a second too.
Okay. I the first time that I went to hunted at Kevin's, I was guided. Well, I've been guided by the same guy, the same PH each time, and a fellow by the name of John Barnes. And I noticed that the staff, the skinners, the people in the skinning shed, the people working there, everybody in the kitchen, everybody referred to him as Madala, which is a Xhosa word. And I came to learn after I asked him that means wise old man. And, John is just a couple of years older than I am, but I thought that was pretty cool that they had that level of respect, because in the Zulu culture, they really respect the old guys, and they had respect for John. They called him Madala. And so I said to John one day when we weren't real busy chasing and shooting stuff, I said, I need a Xhosa nickname like you have. I mean, that one's already taken. And so John conferred, and they decided that my Xhosa nickname, or henceforth and forevermore, would be Tunkulu. And I said, what does that mean? And they said it means tall man. And so I noticed over the next couple of days, they're getting the trackers and the skinners getting used to calling me Tunkulu. But every time they would do that, the rest of them would start giggling. And so I knew something was amiss. And finally it came out that Tunkulu doesn't just mean tall man, it means tall fat.
Oh my gosh. They got you there. They got you.
Yeah, they did.
that Xhosa language is really cool over there. I do wish I knew everything they were saying. They were probably talking crap about us half the time. I couldn't hit anything, so they were probably talking about me. But
yeah, but that's a safe way for them to do it, because the chances are your vocabulary in Xhosa is fairly limited. Yeah. It brings up another point about hunting in South Africa, though, is I always carry an English Afrikaans dictionary with me. Now I realize that you can get that on your smartphone, but the concept is the same. It helps to learn a little Afrikaans in the course of hunting with those guys, because most of them, that is their first language.
Yeah, and David, just to put the time in perspective, the first trip that Pete and I took over there, one of the items of consternation that we had and that we were a little bit worried about was having our film hand inspected versus putting it through the X-ray machine, going through security. Like film, put the back.
Oh, yeah.
Film.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, because we had film cameras. We didn't even have digital cameras. They were just still in their infancy back then. But Pete's kind of been all over the place, and we could sit here and tell stories all day and everything. But real quick, Pete, and keep it along with the kind of the world traveling and the Australian crew. I remember when this happened, and talking to Pete about it when it was happening kind of real time, because he was keeping me up to speed on the medical goings on with this whole thing, is when Pete nearly had his face blown off in Australia on accident. Pete, I'm going to let you tell that story real quick, but it's kind of one of those stories about what can go wrong real quick. And kids, always wear your safety glasses, because you never know.
Well, the other point that it brings up is it's never a bad idea to get some medical travel insurance.
Yes.
There are two or three main outfits that sell that. That would have been a really good time to have it, and I did not have it. But what happened was I was on a hunt with those same Aussie buddies of mine, and you've already come to the conclusion that they're a little bit nuts, and, well, frankly, so am I. So it was a great combination. We decided we were hunting sambar stag in the snowy mountains in the Gippsland region of Victoria. Hadn't had much luck, and the camp dog was getting hungry, and one of the guys said, well, let's go out and shoot a couple of kangaroos for dog meat. I said, man, I'm in. So how do we do this? Well, we go at night, and they shine a big spotlight on them, and you shoot them, and then we drag them back, cut it up for dog meat. So off we go, and there's a kangaroo in the lights, and they hand me 308 and say, take them. And so I mashed the trigger, and my whole life changed. The rifle exploded and sent a bunch of shrapnel into both eyes, primarily my right eye, I had bits of burned gunpowder. I had walnut splinters from the stock. I had shards of brass from the cartridge embedded in my eye, and I was 4 hours from a paved road, and got some serious problems. Also, a bunch of other holes in my face from which blood was flowing. Luckily, the two guys I was with are both the equivalent of EMTs we have here, so they loaded me in the truck and took me to a clinic, and I bounced around a bunch of little clinics and hospitals in both Victoria and New South Wales for the next couple of weeks, and was in contact via email with my eye doctor back here in Fairbanks. And they offered to do the surgery over there. When you're in a foreign land and you're having medical treatment, your medical insurance does not work, as it turns out. So I'm putting everything on my Visa card, running up quite a bill. I eventually got paid back by my medical insurance company here in the States, but it was rough and expensive at the time. But I came back to Alaska, and I had surgery on my right eye. The left eye healed up pretty well. The right eye, they had to take out the shards of brass and the walnut splinters. As it turns out, and I did not know this, there is eye doctors have a list of things that it's okay to leave embedded in your eye, and burnt gunpowder is one of them. I did not know that.
Well, yeah, I would never have known that either.
And so to this day, I have burnt gunpowder embedded in my right eye. But they cut out the brass and the walnut splinters, and then sewed me up. I had some trouble on fires that summer with smoke aggravating. They left the stitches in from May until September, which I thought was interesting, but the world was a little fuzzy as a result. But I ended up recovering and had almost 20/20 vision again. But yeah, the Aussies tried to blow me up, and the side story to that is that when I went back, and that was in 2007, when I went back in a couple of years, I knew they felt bad about it. It wasn't really their fault. It was probably a squib load. And what had happened was the primer went off, sent the projectile partway up the barrel, and then when the rest of the powder ignited, it was essentially there was a blocked muzzle, and that's why the side of the rifle blew off. But it wasn't really their fault, and so I kept reassuring them everything was okay. But when I went back in a couple of years, I took with me a folding red and white cane like the blind people use. And when I got off the airplane in Sydney, I had on a pair of Stevie Wonder glasses on, and I'm gazing up into the atmosphere, tapping that cane in front of me. If I could have found a German Shepherd and brought him with me, I would have done it, just pretending I was completely blind. And those guys just about crapped. It was great.
Oh my gosh. That is one of my biggest fears in this world, is being blinded by something like that. And you think it was just you think it was just a offload that happened? Or?
A lot of people looked at the forensic evidence of that accident, gunsmiths and so forth, and that was the conclusion that most of them concurred on, was that it was a light powder load, a squib load, and that when the primer first went off, it drove the projectile just partly up the barrel, and then when the rest of the powder ignited, it was essentially it had a blocked muzzle, and that's why it blew up.
Nowhere for it to go.
That is incredibly scary. Jeez gracious.
It's a new and special kind of pain to have all that stuff embedded in your eyeball. Trust me.
I'm assuming you were virtually blind for a little while.
Yeah, and surrounded by crazy Australians. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah, you're a different foreign land, and you're also can't see. I tell you what, that's crazy and scary. I'll say that.
And it's an advertisement for getting that medical travel insurance.
Yeah.
I will definitely do that. And I have every trip since then. Of course, nothing else has happened.
I think you sold me on it.
It's that time when you don't have it. But I got to tell you guys, I have read. Now I'm partial, and I'm a bit biased to the book, since I was one of the people who was trying to get Pete to write it for so many years. But I have read a lot of Alaskana books, a lot of hunting books, and Pete's book, The Caribou's on Fire, is one of the best outdoors hunting story, kind of Alaskana type stuff book that's out there. It really is. It's fantastic. The stories are great. What you kind of heard here is just a smidgen of what's in the book, and just some fantastic stories from really somebody that amongst guide circles and hunting circles and trapping circles in Alaska is legendary status is kind of what we're talking about. So it's absolutely fantastic. Pete, where can people get a copy of this book? What's the easiest way to get it, to order it, to get it there the quickest? And what do you want to tell people about how to get it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Peyton. Luckily, I am not surviving on book sales and Social Security. I have a decent retirement, but I love selling my book, and I just ordered another 1,000 copies of it. So since I don't want to be giving them away for Christmas for the rest of my life, the answer to your question is, if you would like an autographed copy of the book mailed to you, ship me an email at petebuist@gmail.com, PETEBUIST@gmail.com, and we'll make arrangements. I'll sign your book and get it off to you right away.
Good deal. Like I said, I really have enjoyed it so far, Pete. I'm 3/4 of the way through. I was on a turkey hunt last week, so I didn't really get to finish it, but it just seems like you have a little bit of everything in there. It's a good read. It's good stories for anybody that loves the outdoors, from caribou to Cape buffalo to bison to anything that you want to hear about. Pete's kind of been through and had some pretty crazy experiences through it all. So I really have enjoyed it, Pete, and I'm looking forward to finishing it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I get enjoyment from knowing that other people are enjoying the book. So I'm glad you are.
Absolutely.
And check out the YouTube channel. Check out the website, ShoshoneAdventures.com. Check out the YouTube channel. We got some awesome videos up there. Lots more to come. Check out the membership packages. And we've got a bunch of other podcasts lined up to bring you guys. And Pete, thank you again for coming on board today and having a chat with us. And not that I don't talk to you all the time anyway, but it's always fun to hear the stories again, and for David to hear them for the first time.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share, and thank you guys for that.
All right, guys. Well, there's your hunt story of the week. I want to say thank you for listening along, but if you want to hear more about these hunts, you can book a consultation online and talk to one of our guys. But we also have a weekly newsletter that comes out with the Shoshone featured hunts, but then also the cancellation hunts, if there is any. They will be on that newsletter. So once again, I want to say thank you for listening, and I will catch you on the next hunt story.